Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to the afternoon keynote speaker. I will be introducing Mita Mallik. She is a corporate change maker with a track record of transforming businesses and cultures. Mita is a passionate storyteller who believes in the power of diversity to spur creative strategic thinking, which can ultimately transform brands. As the head of diversity and inclusion and cross-cultural marketing at Unilever, Mita's efforts to build an inclusive culture are being celebrated. Under her leadership, Unilever is gender balanced at manager level and above. Unilever was named the #1 company for working mothers by Working Mother Media in 2018. Mita also co-created the first of its kind cultural immersion series to increase the cultural competency of marketers, training over 5,000 marketers to date. Mita has had an extensive career in the beauty and consumer products goods space. She was one of the chief lieutenants in launching the Baseline Healing Project in the US, signing award-winning actress and activist Viola Davis as the brand's ambassador to help set the brand back to growth. Mita was named a Working Mother of the Year by She Runs It and named a Valente Award finalist at SXSW for her inspiring work in 2019. She received the inaugural Diversity Innovator Award for the National Association for Female Executives in 2018 and was on the 50 People Under 40 Shaking Up Beauty Youthquake list by Women's Wear Daily. Mita is also a columnist for Sway and a contributor for Fairy God Boss, and her writing has been published in the New York Post, Cosmopolitan, Entrepreneur, The Good Men Project, Scary Mommy, and The Riveter. Mita has an MBA from Columbia University, has a BA from Columbia University and an MBA from Duke University. So let's welcome Mita.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this afternoon's conversation.
Welcome everyone. This is so exciting. And Mita, I cannot express to you how incredible this day has been. And to be able to start this day, I think we've been on as a team since about 4 a.m. this morning. And
wow.
Truly the icing on our cake, primarily because you embody the essence of a woman that we look up to. So when you think about a professional who advocates not just for herself, but for all women around her, and then the authenticity of the mom that you are. And I read a lot of your articles about being a mom, whether it's in this pandemic, being a mom, talking about social unrest and how to talk to your kids about that. I am just so excited. And by default, I have 28 women watching over my shoulder as I get to talk. I feel a bit privileged, but before we continue, I'd love to just have you do a self-introduction, because I know Emily just did, but that is, I think, a few words that describes you, and then we'll talk, because we have a lot of great things that we're going to talk about this afternoon.
Yes. Well, listen, thank you for doing this, hosting this, empowering all of us, and thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be here today. I start how I always start. We're going to laugh because we talked about this. It's week 32, and it's day 2. I'm in 1,500 square feet in Jersey City, New Jersey, right across on the river, right across from One World Trade Center. I have a 5- and 7-year-old and my husband, who we're all quarantining and trying to figure out what this next new chapter is. So that's physically where I am and what I do. And I'm just passionate about this work. I'm somebody who has always been intellectually curious, always somebody who tries to live by my morals and values and what my parents instilled in me. And I like to think I'm funny, although my husband might disagree with that, but I think I'm pretty funny. It's important to have a little levity and humor in all of this. Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. I love that very authentic introduction. When I think of you, I think funny is definitely something that we can add there. But some of the things that I think, not only thinking of you for this moment that we're sharing right now, for this hour that we're sharing with over 600 women across New England and all the way as far as Tulsa, Oklahoma, we have people from Florida and New York and beyond, is I think kind of your purpose, right? And I think about some of the articles that you've written, some of the career transitions and advocacy that you've done. I'd love to know a little bit about your purpose and what really drives you to do the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. My purpose, I really found at Unilever. We took employees through all-day workshops, And they were really personal. You started to talk about like crucible moments and things that happened in your career, and also early on in your childhood. And so my purpose is really empowering those who have been excluded to help them find their voice. And once you find your voice, as you know, to never stop using it. And so that's what really drives me every day. And I think once you find your purpose, it's a little bit like, you know, when your capabilities matches your purpose, sort of the magic happens. And my purpose is today is to be present here with you. My purpose is to be a great mother, a great daughter, sister, wife, friend. And so purpose can often seem lofty because we have many purposes, but I think about what is it that gets me out of bed other than my paycheck? What's the impact and legacy I want to leave in the world? And so thinking about purpose that way has helped me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I resonate so much with that, because a lot of, I think what drives me and what has brought me to this moment in my journey is my kind of, I always say my 12-year-old self that came here on a one from Ethiopia to here. And when you think about that experience, and I think, you know, a lot of folks, as we prepared for this talk with you, wanted to hear more about your childhood. So we talk about purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that adversity and some of the things that we would describe as pain really sets the stage for the type of leader that we are and
Absolutely.
how to evoke change. So I know that I resonate with you in so many levels as an immigrant, as the first generation and mom, but how is it your painful experiences endured you to be the leadership presence and your style and your impact that you've been in this at this point in your career and personal life?
Yeah. Well, you just got me with 12-year-old self. You might make me cry today, because that's really deep when you think about wherever you are in your life, what would you have, what's the conversation you would have with your 12-year-old self? And I would tell her to do it afraid, and that it's going to be a painful journey, but you'll get through it to the other side. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that. I grew up outside of Boston, my proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. My younger brother and I were raised outside of Boston. We were only a handful of families of color. My dad's mother was married when she was 12 years old. My mother's mother was married when she was 10 years old. And they married men in their 20s. They had remarkable lives. They were just remarkable women. They had very large families. And I start by saying that because I also know the privilege that I've had in my life, and that just shows you in less than 3 generations what progress that can be made in gender equity. So oftentimes people think it's very academic, it's something you read in a Harvard Business Review. How do you achieve gender equity? And I'm living proof. This is kind of look like you're living proof, right? We all are living proof. So I start with that lens. I was the funny looking, dark skinned girl with the long, funny looking braid, whose parents had funny accents, who came and dropped me off and picked me up in a funny looking van that played funny looking music, that played funny looking music. And I brought funny smelling food into school until all of that wasn't funny anymore, right? And so I share that because those things seem funny, ha ha ha. And bullying and harassment can take a really dark side quickly. So we're all role models. So even whatever children you have in your life, whoever you're with, talking about these things, the other that's funny can go bad very quickly. And so I was bullied a lot growing up, was called names. I had things thrown at me. I remember I think it was in junior high school where we had the S word and the N word spray painted on our driveway and in front of our lawn. And I had no idea what those words meant. I just knew they weren't good words. But I also knew my parents couldn't afford to actually repave the driveway, or actually what was considered a hate crime. The town should have come and removed the words from the street, and they didn't. And it just stayed there until the New England weather washed it away. And I think the incident I had shared with you, which was really pivotal in my life, was I was freshman year in high school, and I was in intro to physical science class, and there were 2 white boys who had been bullying me throughout that time in the class, in the hallway, grabbing my hair. I had really long hair to my knees, yanking it against the locker, all sorts of things happening. And it really escalated that one day where they decided to set my hair on fire. And they decided to light matches and just kept throwing them into my braid. And my lab partner, who never spoke to me actually for the first time spoke to me and said, "Your hair is on fire."
Mhm.
And so I can remember, as we all do when we have memories like this, I remember everything about that classroom and every moment of what happened that day. And while the damage to my hair grew back, the damage to my psyche was deep. And it was also actually the first time in my life where someone had stood up as an advocate for me. I had my parents, I had my brother, I had safety at home, but never had anyone in the community stood up for me. And so it was the first time that the guidance counselor, and those boys were only suspended for a day, but the guidance counselor saw something in me I didn't see in myself. And I guess suspected that I was fast and not coordinated, but I was fast, and had me join the cross country team. And so, and then later on track, and I was very fast. And so the sports became the great equalizer in my life. And even in moments where I'm really struggling, running has really helped me. And what I would say is, over the years, as many of us do, Google exes, Google people in our lives, I've Googled those bullies. And as much as I've Googled them and have been on a path to forgiveness, what I don't understand is, where were the teachers? Where were the parents? And where was law enforcement? Right? Where were the people that could have stood up and said something? And that is happening still in our schools and schoolyards today. It's happening virtually, but it's also happening in our organizations. So that's the analogy I like to use, is that, when you see something, say something. Right. Where were those people that could have stood up for me? And that's really been a driving force in my career.
I mean, I think that, as you say, that there's so many emotions that I know many, and we're looking at the chats on fire, and we know that we have an hour with you, so we're going to keep moving. But one thing that you said, and I could share with you that I, till this day, remember the first person that actually called me the N-word. I remember the first person that commented on me being from Ethiopia, so the power of the media being such a kind of force. So, and then as you grow older, it turns into actually the 43-year-old woman that I am. And I think not in this particular time in my career, but I remember about 18 to 20 months ago, I was in a place where I was bullied at work. And it was with someone who didn't have social IQ in terms of diversity. And so I think that just talking about, being in a room, and you talk about advocacy and making sure that if you see something, say something. So, I've had a few people reach out to me, and I think actually I can resonate with them in saying that you work so hard to build a reputation, a career.
Right.
And you've done everything that you need to do in terms of academia, and you've done everything you need to do in terms of showing your worth. And then you come to a place where someone is bullying you at work.
Right.
And how do you handle it? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I've been bullied throughout my career at work. And I think as I share my story more and more with people, there are usually, and there are men who have been bullied, but I'll just focus on women. Right. It's either, as I share more and more of the things I've been through in my career, women will say to me in response, yes, and that happened to me. And we never talked about it. Or, really interestingly enough, leaders saying, I allowed bullying to go on too long in my organization, and I didn't realize it. I believed the bully over all the other people that left the organization. And that's like stunning, right? And I would say to you, I think it's very easy to say to be an advocate. It's important. And it's the cost of not doing it is more, right? Yeah. It's a very cost. But I would say there is a cost to being an advocate. And what do I mean by that? There is a cost of your safety, your comfort, financial security, your pride. You will make mistakes. It's very easy if we're in a room together. Let's say it's now a virtual room, and somebody makes a comment that would be considered sexual harassment. And if the person that makes that is the head of HR or the head of the business group, and you're sitting there and seeing that happen to me, and you're not at that level, it will cost you something to call them out, because there's power dynamics and hierarchy. It's human nature. It's how society was built. And so there is a cost to these things, but it's so important that we speak up, and it's so important that we figure out different ways to go about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And to your point, I think that, the decision to say something and not to say something, not only to not be a part of the problem, but when you're in the room and you know that there's a problem happening, the power, the amazing, I guess, boldness to be able to say, hey,
Absolutely.
I see Mita being treated wrong. It's not right. I know that she's definitely someone is a great contributor. She's worked so hard to be where she is in her career. I object. And I would say that most women struggle with that. And, when you're, as a woman, we're already struggling with so many barriers to be at
Absolutely.
the table. And you're at the table, you're finally at the table and you see a woman being mistreated, you've got to say something. And I think that that's important to kind of bring out here as well. And here's what I would tell you, as you're struggling in your career and when you're in that room of being bullied,
Right.
and there are people that have kind of traveled with you in terms of your mentors and sponsors. And we talk about the difference, and I'd love for you to talk about the difference between the two. How do you navigate through getting through that bullied kind of stage when your mentors and sponsors are silent? They're not
Yeah.
accessible, you can't reach them, and you're emailing and you're texting and you're crying out for help, and it's literally radio silence. So
Yeah.
what is the difference between them responding and them not responding? Because the
Yeah.
major don't respond, right?
No. It's something that's very top of mind for me because I'm somebody, as you know, is a problem solver, which is why I decided to stay in the inclusion space. And the problem I'm trying to solve right now in my head, I'm trying to understand why organizations allow bullies to continue to not survive, thrive. Right? Thrive.
Right. Yes.
So what is it that allows them to thrive? And I would say to you, if you have gone to your sponsor, if you have gone to your mentors, if you have gone to HR, if you have documented, if you have done everything you can, it is time for you to move on, right? If you have done everything you can, right?
Yeah.
Because somebody once said this, and I think it's a famous quote. I was on another panel, but I love this. It's probably on a t-shirt somewhere. You need to go somewhere where they will celebrate you, not tolerate you.
Right. Right.
Right. So think about that. That sort of stunned me when I heard that. I know it's not new, but celebrate, not tolerate. And so you deserve to be somewhere, right? And I think at some point, if you have done everything you can to raise the alarm, to find other people to help, and if you are not in an organization that will support you and allow you to thrive, it is time to make the decision to think about where you might go next.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something that is such a true statement, and not only do I kind of relate and it resonates with me personally. However, as you know, leaving before you're ready is the most difficult thing you
It
ever.
is, absolutely.
Leaving because you have to leave because you're being managed by someone who is not only unqualified but bullying you. And then to even sit in a room where you know that you're competent, you're capable, and
Absolutely.
your sponsors, your mentors, and really to really bake this cake fully, HR is looking at you like they don't get it. They've known you for as long as you've been investing
Yeah.
time, and they're looking at you like you're shedding tears and they're not doing anything about it. How do you leave before you're ready?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I would say to you, I have stayed in some places longer than I should have, right?
Yeah.
And in other places, I stayed because I moved very quickly because it's about your well-being too and your mental sanity. But we need to make a paycheck and we have obligations. So it's very easy to say leave. But here's what I would tell you. Here's what I would tell my younger self. Always be looking. Always be looking. Always be looking, right? And I was always that person. I could be, the happiest I was. I recently just left Unilever, which I know we'll talk about, but I've had a remarkable 7 years at Unilever, and I had people calling me throughout the years. I would never take the call because I was loyal and I was like, I love this company. I'm going to continue to do the work. But a really good friend of mine and a fantastic coach named DC Marshall said to me, you should be interviewing once a year, every year.
Right.
For practice, and just you never know what might surprise and delight you, and that's unexpected, and to always be nurturing your networks. So my advice is you should always be looking. And then I think you have to do what's right for you. I've tolerated situations far longer than I should have because I was like, I'm not ready to leave because I was scared. Well, I don't want to just resign because what am I going to do next? Right. So it's, I can't advise people on what to do. You have to do what's right for you. But if you continue to have a great network and support of badass women and men surrounding you, they will help you and you will find your next chapter.
I agree with you. And I think that there's always, a silver lining to all of the adversities that we face as women. And I think that's
absolutely
resilient. And you talk about support and, trying to find support outside of your organization. And you said it, we'll get to your next chapter. And I'm so excited because I follow you and I look forward to reading articles every morning when you post them and that you share. I do. And it's something that inspires me.
Oh, thank you.
When you're in an organization and you need to look beyond your immediate circle, tell us a little bit about, I guess, your transition. I know that, Unilever is your next transition and you're extremely proud of the work that you've done there. How do you kind of transition outside of your hindsight of what you're seeing now?
So ask the question again, just so I'm clear. You want me to talk about like my decision to leave Unilever or just advice on where to go next for people?
Yeah, your decision to leave Unilever, because I know that was a big decision for you.
Yeah, it was a big decision.
I know dozens of women who are in that place.
Yes.
Decision myself. So what was the journey like?
Yeah, the journey was, I have been obsessed with storytelling since I was a little girl. I was like, loved watching the commercials when people still watch commercials. You should still watch commercials because we want people to buy stuff. But I just was always a passionate storyteller, which is like, as you said, I still love to write and share content. And so no surprise that I went into consumer product goods, spent over, I want to say 15 years at this point in that industry. And I think some pieces of advice of things that were coming out to me loud and clear was, at some point, I didn't want to be seen as only a big company person. I wanted to show that I was nimble and could do other things. I wanted to show that I could go and work in a different industry. And I wanted to show that I could build something from scratch. So those were some of the things that I was thinking about in terms of my next career move. And I had been lucky to get lots of calls from the marketplace, but I wasn't sure what to do next. And so I decided to join a company called Carta, which I did share the news on LinkedIn today. They help, they're in the fintech space and they help companies manage their cap tables and help with equity and equity ownership. And so really excited to be working for Henry Ward, who's the CEO there, and his team. And they are 900 people. They are a global organization based in the US. They're not in CPG. There's something very different. So I think I decided if I was going to leave Unilever, it would be for something very different to diversify my skill set as a leader, to show that I could go work for a startup, go work in tech and do something very different. So I think it's actually pretty scary, I'll tell you, to be leaving a company that you loved and worked for so many years during a pandemic. How am I going to make friends? How is this virtual onboarding going to work? And I would just say to anyone who's worried about it, just go for it. And anything that makes you scared is probably worth it. Like being scared, being uncomfortable, and going for something that's so different, right?
Right.
From something I knew well. So that's my advice. I would ask anyone listening, what are you really good at and what have you already done? And what do you need to actually go and do and try that you can say you did?
Yeah, that's so exciting. And I think that, most of the time as women, we try to identify, or we have leaders that identify the things that we're not good at. And all day spend many, many days being told, well, you're not good at, how to do PowerPoints. You're not good at how to strategize. You're not good at storytelling. When in reality, it's really more about focusing on what you're good at. And that boldness, that ability to, I know how, passionate you are, and in that CPG space and Unilever, I know that you don't leave relationships, you actually connect. And I know that that'll be a connectivity for you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so excited for that. So in your next journey, and if you can give advice to women who, by the way, leaving for a job that is a completely different industry is petrifying, right?
Yes.
you're a good people leader. You know that you can develop, lead, you can convince, you can really develop people to see the good in themselves. And so that people leadership is very important. But what's that factor? Like, what is that moment, that tipping point for you? You woke up one morning, you said, you know what, I'm ready to lead. How do we get there? It's nerve-wracking. And I know that for me personally,
Yeah.
it took me all of 18 to 20 months to make my decision to my next chapter. And it was with a lot of tears because you're not sure.
You're not sure. Yeah,
Right
absolutely.
decision. So how did you do it? I mean,
Yeah, I would say, like, for me, it was, and this is what I would ask everyone listening to think about. What are the points on the board that you can continue to put in your organization? Are you willing to take a lateral move? Are you willing to move functions? Are you willing to move locations, which kind of seems null and void right now because everyone's, zooming in. But regardless, think about what else you're willing to do in the organization, what else the organization's offering you. It has to be a match. And for me, I had just made a lot of great impact in the 7 years there. I felt that whatever else I was going to do at this point would have been great, but would have been incremental for me, right? It would have been incremental for me because I had done so much work there. And so I had a VP at Avon when I worked there. The best piece of advice she ever gave me was, she said, when you're comfortable, it's time to get uncomfortable. And I had been very comfortable. Now, of course, no one's really comfortable in the pandemic. There's lots of new challenges at work, but overall, I knew how to operate. I knew who the players were. I had my career sponsors. I knew how to get things done. And so you're like, this all sounds great, but I was comfortable. And so for me, when I start to feel that way, I start to think, okay, maybe I should start. That's the moment that I think it's time for me to go make impact somewhere else.
Yeah, that's so important. And I do want to talk about one of the things that stand out about you to me, and that's being an inclusion champion. And I think that is going to be the DNA of what I see in you. But before we leave that and get into that topic, can you talk about, I guess, when you lose a mentor or a sponsor, when you lose a organization, there's a mourning.
Absolutely.
It's like losing someone significant in your life. And how do you get through that loss? And how do you find your next, I guess, mentor or sponsor? What does that look like? Because a lot of young people are afraid. And I see a lot of the questions that are coming through the chat. And some of them is, hey, I'm in an organization. There's no diversity and inclusion. I'm struggling. And my mentors and sponsors are radio silent. What do I do? So how do you mourn that loss of a mentor or a sponsor? And then
I'll answer this. Well, let me answer the first part, and then if you want to talk about the radio silent, ask me again because I'll forget. There's too much to talk about. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
What I would say to you, and I learned this the hard way in my career, never tie yourself to one person, no matter how much you love that person. And it doesn't mean that person will leave your life forever, but if that person is the only leader that you've connected with in the organization, and I've seen this happen to so many women, and that person leaves, then what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
That was the person who was advocating for you. That was the person who was giving you, like I say, what are the great things that a sponsor does? It's about advocating, it's about amplifying, it's about access. And all of a sudden those things are gone because that person has left. And so the good news, bad news, the good news is that person's left, that person can still be an external career sponsor for you. And I want to take a moment to define the difference between a mentor and a sponsor, because we've talked about this. I am over mentored. You are over mentored. We are mentors for each other. I love mentors. I wouldn't have gotten here without a badass community of men and women who got me here today with you on stage. And I would say that as much as you're a mentor for me, you are not going to get me. You're not going to amplify, advocate, or get me access in my organization because you simply don't work there. Right. So it needs to be somebody who's 2 levels above you, who has decision-making rights, who's going to introduce you to the CEO or the head of a division, is going to get you on a slate for a job you didn't know existed, is going to give you real feedback, is going to coach you before a big presentation. Like, that is the difference between a mentor or a sponsor. And when I talk about a sponsor who leaves an organization, I've had so many sponsors who have left Unilever. Now I'm leaving Unilever, but they are now, one of my sponsors is looking for board seats for me because I've told her I want to serve on a board. So there are still ways in which when somebody leaves your organization, they'll still help you externally. They might help you get your next job, right? But I do think that's why it's really critical to think about, and this is the painful part, especially with the pandemic, people losing their jobs, people looking for new opportunities. You have to be thinking about every year how you're replenishing your career sponsors, right? You're thinking about, especially if you move functions or the person leaves or you leave, right? I'm in a position now, I got to find I have to start all over again, right? We have to do, not all over again, but I'm joining a new company. And so that's my advice is don't tie your fortunes to one person.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I certainly agree with you. And I guess the next thing is, and one of the things that is so great about you is that you are an inclusion champion. And I want you to talk about what that means, right? I think that both in our personal and professional lives, we want to say that we're inclusive. And what does that mean? I've been in rooms that I know inclusion is not happening, and you want to say something, you want to say it strategically. However, you're stuck. So how are you an inclusion champion? Because if you don't have the D&I role, if you're not the VP of D&I, if you're not being looked at, if the company that you actually work for doesn't have a D&I leader, how do you do that? How are you an inclusion champion? We want to know.
Yeah. So one of the things I do in my role and I love to do, and that's my job as coming from marketing, I think about this, is mapping a leader's journey throughout the organization and thinking about all the ways which I can interrupt their bias.
Yeah.
Right. And so every one of us is a leader. I don't care what title you have. So you can be, no matter what you're doing, you could be being an inclusion champion, right? You can be head of a division who's sitting through talent reviews. You could be recruiting. You could be the head of HR. You could be an associate analyst who is seeing how, non-inclusive behaviors are showing up in meetings. It's everywhere. We just have to think about how we want to tackle it. And so one of the things I would say, especially, looks very different in a remote world, right? Check your calendars this week, check your calendar tomorrow, and see who is invited to meetings and why. There is absolutely no reason. It's a virtual table. We're not going to go sit on the radiator. It's not a 4-person table. It's not in London. And so I think, and I don't really like the word microaggression because I think what's the opposite, macroaggression? I don't know. So we'll say microaggression, but I think it's one of the number one microaggressions and number one behaviors that we need to focus on and being inclusive leaders. Why inviting people to the meeting, inviting them to present, inviting them to own their work, inviting them to share their voice. And this happens a lot, I think, in larger corporations. I don't really know about smaller organizations. I'll find out, but I think they're very simple things we can be doing. Thinking about, who's invited to the meeting and why, and changing that. I was invited to this summer, a meeting with our CEO from London. He was doing virtual visits, and a woman who had done all this work with me, my peer, wasn't invited to the meeting. And I sent a note back and I said, well, she needs to be invited and present with me because we did this work together. So that's an inclusion champion of looking out for each other. And I don't even know if that was intentional. I just think they might not have realized that she was also leading the work, but whatever it is, get her a seat at the table. Right. And then I think, go ahead. Yeah. And then I think just thinking about how we show up and how we're inclusive, right? I think my biggest fear right now is that it's too easy to stay on mute. It's too easy to have your camera off, and it's too easy as if you were never in the meetings all day long. You will disappear off of your organization's radar screens. So coaching each other to say, you know what, Mita, I get it. You don't want to be on camera all day, but these are the career defining moments. This is the CEO. This is the head of sales. Make sure your camera's on. Make sure that you're able to make a comment. If you can't, use the chat box. Whatever it is, making sure that people hear and see your voice is so important.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I would agree with you is that be where, you're able to show up, right? And one of the difficult things I think is, and I'm seeing someone chatting us all the way from Florida, and I'm going to get to the question, and I'm getting text about it. Here's what I would tell you, and I think that the struggle is, how do you circumvent not being invited to the table? So, you talk about being at the table, being at meetings, and especially if you're a middle manager trying to prove yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're not being invited to do the work. And a lot of the things that you do are really kind of low level and no really a lot of amplifying light on them. How do you get to the point where you can prove yourself? And we have Crystal from Florida reporting to a manager who purposely doesn't give me opportunity to be at the table, puts me on low projects, and feels invisible. So I'll leave it at that. I think that's plenty.
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
Sorry, Crystal, you're going through that. I've been there, and that's really painful. I have gotten to my point in my career, and we're all on our own journey. I will ask for the invite. I will email my boss or whoever it is and say, I'd like to be invited to the meeting. Now, if they don't invite you, okay, you tried, you didn't get invited. I would say one of the things I've also done successfully in my career is set up your own meetings. Not that people need more meetings, but what do I mean by that? If you've been working on a project that no one knows you're working on because your boss is taking credit for it, set up meetings with cross-functionals, with peers, let them know that you're working on it, and do it in a clever way to say, hey, I'm working on this project and would love to get your feedback on it. And they're like, oh, Mita was working on it. Huh, we thought it was so-and-so doing all this work, right? So I think there are other ways to get on the radar screen and get visibility. If you're not getting invited to that meeting, to let other individuals know who touch that work that you're the one actually doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Crystal's agreeing, and it looks like, she's going to take that advice and make sure that she uses it. And, I would also say, and I think that you would echo, is that if you're in the room where you know that you're in the room with a talented person, and you know that they have opportunity to share a lot of what they are not being given an opportunity to share, say something. I think that we're afraid as well in terms of, being able to sound the alarm when we know that inclusion is not happening.
Absolutely.
When we know that we're sharing a space, or we're in a team dynamic where a certain person is being an opportunity to be on large scale projects, where, a simple error on a PowerPoint is such a big deal when one person does it, but then another person does it. It's like, oh, no big deal. So how do you, I guess, from a comfortability perspective for women or men, by the way, how do you grab someone that's struggling and get them to get to the table? Is that even possible?
Struggling to be inclusive, or struggling to have their voice heard?
To be included and to have their voice heard.
Yeah, I think I would tell you, and now it makes sense sharing what I shared growing up. Yeah. I think if you had called me 5 years ago, I wouldn't have shown up. I would have pretended I was sick. And now this is different because we're just chatting together. I know many, many people are watching us. It's very different in a virtual world. It took me so long. It took me years and years of practice to find my voice and to be very present and intentional and comfortable presenting. Now I'll present in front of thousands of people. Only my mother and brother to this day are shocked. Anyone who meets me now is like, you were painfully shy? We don't believe it. But I would say that for me, using my voice has been practice. I am not an athlete. You all know I run really fast, but I'm not an athlete. And you look at great athletes, it's practice. And so I remember someone on my team a few years ago who struggled to present in groups of more than 20 or 30. And I would tell her to practice, and she thought that was the funniest thing and would laugh at me. And I was like, no, join Toastmasters. Ask my husband how many times he's heard me practicing in the shower, to an empty room, driving into work, constantly just thinking about, I'm going to go to this meeting and I have to present. There's the presenting and getting fear over presenting, but then there's the simple, like, make sure you are, I'm going to translate this into a virtual setting, because generally it would be, I would have walked into a room of 100 seats empty and sat in the back corner, even though all of this, because I didn't want to be seen. So virtual sense, show up early and just hang out, because you'll never know. Like, I show up to meetings with my former CEO because I knew he'd be on early, and he and I would just banter. Great opportunity for FaceTime, right? As other people join the meeting early. And then what I would do is, as I was getting more comfortable using my voice, I would ask a question, right? So just getting yourself to ask a question. And to this day, I always ask a question first because it helps me get over my nerves. So just so people can see that you are present, that you're engaged. Because I was told early in my career, we can tell the lights are on, but you're not saying much.
Right.
Like, we can tell you're there and I'm taking notes and stuff, but, you know, ask a question. In many companies, they send out pre-read materials, right? They send materials out in advance of the meeting. I would study those and then come up with questions to ask or comments to ask. And it's just, honestly, for me, it has just been a matter of practice, because the more I do it, the more comfortable I am speaking.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, speak up. If you have something quality to say, show up with quality.
Absolutely.
And make sure that you show up, and that's so important. A couple of things that I would tell you is some of the things that I ponder over, and I always talk about, if I knew then what I knew now, like peeling that back just a layer deeper. And one of the things that we do is talk to girls and young women that are, you know, high school and college age. And we just did that on the Young Women's Circle panel.
Yeah.
And if you could think about it, and they're all tuned in, you know, you're a mom, you're a wife, you're a daughter. There's so many dynamic things about you. And if you can give your younger self, I would say one advice, but I feel like it's just going to be not enough. But take us through, I guess, what you would do differently, right? You know, we talk about being very kind of, I wouldn't change anything about me when I think about the struggles that I've had, the bad managers, the bad mentors. There's no such thing as a bad mentor, by the way. I think that everyone has good intentions with being a mentor, but what piece of advice would you give your younger self at this point?
So much. Do you have another hour?
Yeah, we actually are doing good with time. It's 46 past the hour.
Well, I'll just give you a few things. I did mention do it afraid. I spent too much of my life afraid of what others would think of me, and judgment. And a lot of that was having been bullied. I was just so afraid all the time. And so I think do it afraid is like my number one thing. I think the number two thing is, when I think about my career, the moments I've accelerated my career is when I took the unpopular assignment, I took the difficult assignment, I took the assignment that wasn't expected of me. And so we're all sort of, and this is again coming from Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, it's this corporate ladder we've all been ingrained in, right? I'm going to go from here to here to here, here. And I went from here. And I will tell you, leading inclusion and cross-cultural marketing for Unilever was my biggest game changer in my career and career booster, right? And the level of exposure I got both internally and externally, I couldn't have imagined. So the assignments that people come to you to ask you about, the things you would never do, it's not my job description, it's not what I signed up to do. I would say embrace it and see what you can do with it, because if you can differentiate yourself, it will pay back in leaps and bounds. And then I would just say the last one for me is, for now anyways, I'm sure I have more things I would say to my younger self, but you know, one of the things that I've struggled with culturally is I grew up, as I said, the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents, and so many of the things you are raised culturally in don't actually translate to corporate America. So don't be afraid to question authority, because I think growing up, it was much, you know, children are to be seen, not to be heard. You don't question authority. You don't question the aunties and uncles in your community. You don't question the teacher. You don't, and then you're suddenly, I'm thrown into corporate America and you're supposed to question your CEO. And that's what they pay you to do. It's not a sign of disrespect. It is what you're paid to do, is to question and problem solve. So I wish I had done that earlier in my career.
That's very good advice. And I think that that takes a lot of boldness to be in a situation where you have to speak up. You have to speak up and be true to what you know is supposed to be the voice that you have. So
yeah, I mean, I think also that, like, because I know this defy authority, speak up, it could seem really like, yes, there are moments in your career you should do that, but it was even smaller things. Like, If a manager would hand me something and say, go do this, and if I thought it could be done a better way, I probably wouldn't say anything. I just do it the way they told me to, right? So it was the small and the big things throughout my career that I wish earlier on that I would say, okay, well, you said to do ABC, but I'm actually looking at this and I think it could be E, Q, and Z. And they'd be like, oh, right? Because that is like, you think about the people, you know, we pay people to think, right? We pay people to problem solve. And so I love that if someone on my team comes to me. And I do that less often to say, I want you to solve this problem. Here are some ideas how we can solve it. I'm not going to give you the roadmap. But I love when people challenge and say, actually, I think you missed these two things. And I'm like, great, that's why you're here. That's why we hired you.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, for young people, and I remember one of my mentees had a manager who was managing a very, very young, impressionable, very, very hardworking professional. And one of the conversations, this is a Fortune 500 company, one of the assignments that my conversation that I had with this young lady is that she was asked to build a website for marketing. And, you know, that's a big ask, right?
Yeah.
And I remember, you know, the person going at it and actually sitting down and trying to present a website for marketing, and leadership sitting there like, who gave you this assignment? Clearly knowing that, one, it was not an assignment you should have been giving to someone at that point. And so I think that it's really sifting through what the right kind of ways to object as well. You know, projects that mean something, object when things don't make sense. Like, do you really want me to build the website for marketing in my role? Or do you really want me to figure out the org chart for an organization that has thousands of people? And we just went through the biggest org chart and reorg of our lives, and you want me to give you an org chart for, we don't even know what we're doing. So
exactly. Yeah.
And it can be difficult, but I think that what you've shared with us is extremely helpful, is that say what you know, do what you know, and learn as much as possible. The last thing I want to say, and I do want to give a couple of women, we're at 3:51, is an opportunity for you to talk about integration. And I don't want to call it balance, integration, about the being an incredible professional. Not only that, you don't just kind of do the status quo, you actually give us so many amazing articles to read, things that you do that I think are amazing and a value add for us. So what does the integration looks like? How do we follow Mita? Where can we find you? Not, you know, 600 requests on LinkedIn would be overwhelming, but we love you. So
no, sure. No, absolutely. Listen, I'll take the 600 requests. Anyone follow me on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram as well. I'm predominantly professionally on LinkedIn, and just started dabbling in Instagram and Twitter. It's too many. I have Twitter, but you can tweet me and I might just give you a heart or something. So that's it. But I would say that I feel an enormous amount of responsibility now for where I've gotten in my career, to be very honest about the things I struggle with being a working mother. I think, as many of you know, there is such a premium placed on fatherhood. You know, it was interesting, even when I announced that I was leaving Unilever, but I wasn't ready to announce where I was going yet because I wanted to give my new employer time to make the announcement. A number of people assumed that I was staying home and said to me, oh, well, you're staying home to spend more time with your children. Not that that would be a bad thing. That's what my mother did most of her life. And I, at some point, might make that choice. But it was interesting because if I was a man, I don't think people would have made that assumption. I don't think people would have made the assumption, right? But I also feel a responsibility to share the things I'm struggling with. Remote schooling, being a chef, a failed summer camp counselor, being a referee, all those things, the struggles with my husband culturally, as I just need to ask for more help. And also we're co-parenting, right? So to really I can't tell you what I'm doing next week. I could tell you what I'm doing for dinner, but I'm very much still in survival mode, where I wake up every morning and I'm like, what are the two things I'm going to do to keep my kids alive? What are the two things I'm going to do for my company? And also with my husband as a family unit, trying to figure out like, what are the things that need to get done today versus tomorrow? And I think many of us, until we are out of this, are operating the same way. I think just be kind to yourselves. That's the biggest thing I can say. So I'm working on practicing that.
And I love that you just say it, because I think that, you know, what you just said is what a lot of women struggle with. And so for those 600 plus women who are logged in right now, you're listening to Mita Mallik, who is crafting brands with purpose, which I love, who is an inclusion champion, who is a mother, a passionate storyteller, because I can listen to her for 5 more hours, and really identifies with just taking it one day at a time. I think that we pressure ourselves to have it all figured out and to be able to always know what's next and what's tomorrow. And I always feel like it's not a work-life balance, it's more of an integration. And you can't be an A+ mom, an A+ wife, an A+ kid, an A+ mentor, an A+ aunt, sister, all in the same day. But you do have to pull out the GPA. So the semester has to come out.
This is exactly, I love that. I always say, at the end of my life, I want to say I did it all well. It doesn't mean every day I'm doing it all well. It's not,
Right.
to your point.
Right.
It's the balance that you will achieve at the end of it, because some days I'm an amazing mom and not so amazing mom, and some days I'm an amazing leader and not so amazing leader, and wife and sister and mother and friend and all of those, daughter. Yeah.
Exactly. So I love the essence of who you are. I love your culture, and I've learned so much in this hour.
Oh, thank you.
Quickly, and
We're done?
well, hey, listen, it's at 3:55. We are going to get some final thoughts from you, but what I want to share with you and what it's meant for us to be able to not only get your attention and have you here at this moment on this conference with us in 2020 means a whole lot, primarily because we are a movement of over 800, almost 1,000 women across New England. And when you think about the 28 women that spent time putting this conference together,
yeah,
we are all passionate professionals. We are all passionate mothers. Some are wives, some are fiancés, some are millennials thinking about the next thing. So it's a very diverse advisory council. And for me personally, you know, I get to take a day off. So I'm very passionate about the profession that I'm in and the team that I have at the GBCBB. I love my team. And I've made that pivot to be with an incredible team and a woman that leads with purpose, that I truly align and support. But to be here today with you has, I know, evoked a sense in me that I want to be purposeful. I've always been purposeful because my mom has been a defining factor for me. My father is a force in my life, and that's why I do this conference, and that's why we do this conference. So one advice, it's 3:56, and I can listen to you forever. Anything that we're chatting, I can't get to everyone's question. We'll get them when we do have an opportunity, but inspiration as far as how do we hang on, how do we keep going, and what can you say to us? Last advice for us.
My last advice is, again, what I would tell my 18-year-old self is, don't ever let anyone dim your light, and don't shrink to fit in a world that you don't belong in. And I wish I could go back and tell my younger self that, but I'm telling her that now, and I'm telling you all that you are all, each individual, amazing, and don't let anyone ever dim your light.
Incredible. And ladies and gentlemen, and I say gentlemen because we have husbands and boys, and my 11 and 14-year-old are actually probably logged on by this point. And we have incredible people that are logged on here. You heard it. Do not shrink yourself, inspire yourself. And Mita, we are so grateful to you so much for taking the time. I love the backdrop of your amazing picture from one of your kids, and that.
Yes, this is my life.
And we love that. And thank you. We're going to end our conference on a high. And I know that they're waiting for all of you on the main stage to close off, but I would like to tell you, as the founder and executive director of R.I.S.E Women's Leadership Conference, thank you from all of us, 600, 1,000 strong. We love you.
Thank you. I want to come back next year. I'll be here.
September 9th.